this is how we have things set up. We have 2 PSCs in one site, and then we have another set of PSCs in another site. They're all encompassed under a single SSO domain. There's a couple things that we need to tackle prior to building this all out. The first one is DNS. Most of these systems need a DNS entry, and they don't just need a for lookup, they need a reverse lookup as well. So if you don't have a reverse lookup, you're going to have to create something that can facilitate that reverse. The PSCs will need it. The vCenters will need a DNS entry. There's going to be a VIP on the load balancers that will need a DNS entry. The only system that really doesn't necessarily need a DNS entry is the witness server. These connections here actually communicate over IP. So you're good to go there. The systems that you see, basically all these systems are going to need an Ntp server. Load balancers generally have Ntp servers in them, but all of these other systems that are sitting out here really need to have that Ntp server going for them. The best way to do this is set up your PSCs and then get the load balancer squared away. Then make a connection through the load balancer and make sure you're going to hit these PSCs. This is just part 1 of this solution. Parts 2, 3, and 4 will go in depth on how to get all of this set up. But just know that it's easier to deploy these PSCs, then deploy the load balancers, and then deploy vCenter, as opposed to repointing vCenter to a VIP or something along those lines. So get the load balancer set up. We'll test connectivity through here. So the other thing to mention is that VMware actually only supports 3 load balancers. So they support F5, they support the Netscaler from Citrix, and they support NSX. And from experience, I can tell you that if you do not use one of those 3 load balancers and call support, and they determine that it is something going on with how it's connecting to the PSCs, like the vCenter's trying to get to the PSCs and can, or something along those lines, they will say it's an unsupported topology, and that's where it ends with them. So keep that in mind before you even start this journey of making vCenter HA and getting all the components up. So now we need to talk about how we want to secure the traffic with certificates, specifically around the load balancers. The easiest way is to do Ssl Pass-Through. What this means is that the load balancers don't actually have your certificates on them. They just pass the traffic to wherever the destination is. In this case, it's going to be from vCenter. It's going to pass through the load balancers and hit the PSC. So that communication will be secure. The last thing I want to mention here is how VMware wants you to configure your load balancers and how the vCenters get connected to the PSCs. They want you to use a value of 1,440 seconds on the connection that it has with whatever PSC it picks. Well, that equates to 24 hours. So your load balancers are actually pointing to one PSC basically 100% of the time. Now, if that PSC fails, the load balancers should fail over to the other PSC and things are just happy days at that point. However, if you have an environment where you can't spend the money on the load balancers, or you already have a load balancer product in place that doesn't meet VMware's criteria, you can literally remove those load balancers, keep the 2 PSCs in place, connect your vCenter to one of the PSCs. Now what happens if that PSC dies? Well, there's commands that you can use on vCenter to repoint him to the second PSC that you have. So how much value is the load balancer giving you where it is facilitating an automatic failover as opposed to a manual failover? That's probably something that your organization needs to decide on, how quickly things are migrated to the other PSC, what's moving through vCenter, backups going through there, etc. So this is my lab, and I just want to show you a couple things that we need in order to continue on building this vCenter HA solution out. What I've done here is I've created 2 PSCs in this cluster, which signifies a site. And I've created 2 PSCs in this cluster, which signifies the second site. The next step that I'm going to do is to actually make them a subordinate CA of my organizational root CA. So the creation of these PSCs in a ring topology or replication agreement is on the web page, and I will link it down below. The documentation to make the VMCA on the PSC is a subordinate CA, so it can hand out your organizational certificates. I will also link down below. And then the last thing is getting the load balancer set up. What I'm going to be doing is setting up the Netscaler, and I will also put a document on getting that squared away for vCenter HA as well. And again, down below, a link for that. So once you've got your head around what we've talked about in this first part of this 4-part series, we can go ahead and move on to part 2. If you're going to make your PSCs a subordinate CA, go ahead and follow that before you move on to part 2. And then you'll be basically in really good shape to deploy the remaining pieces of the infrastructure. I hope this has been informative, and thank you for listening.